Welcome back to Leaders Live. Charlie Stevens, your host. We are recording or broadcasting live from Harlem today with this beautiful green screen background. Having another great show, another great guest, Nick Jordan, CEO, founder of Narrative, we're going to be talking with. Before we get started with the show, we're going to have a quick word from our supporting partner, Mike O'Mara at Entre. I think Mike's camera is working, so let's switch over to him. Mike? There we go.
Hey, what's going on, Charlie? How are you, man? Yeah, I'm super excited for this. I think what Nick's doing is awesome, and I'm excited for the interview. I think it will be really good for everyone who's tuning in on our social or YouTube or whatever. If you have questions for Nick throughout the interview, feel free to just drop it in the comments or on YouTube or on our website. And we'll be doing a quick Q&A at the end. So if you don't know what we're doing here at Entre, we're a social network for entrepreneurs, investors, and freelancers. We're really trying to help as many entrepreneurs and founders as possible get connected to everything that they need. So we do a ton of events like these with Charlie, and we have also a networking event going on tonight at 6. So if anyone wants to check that out, they can just go onto our site and sign up for that as well. That will be really cool to actually just like network and meet people in the startup ecosystem. So besides that, you can connect with other like-minded people. We have a little over 7,000 people now on the app and everything. And you can sign up for free at joinentre.com. But without further ado, I'll kick it back over to you, Charlie. Like I said, if you have questions, drop them in the comments for Nick, and we'll get to the Q&A at the end.
Cool. Thanks, Mike. Definitely check out Entre.com. Download the app. It's really cool. They just launched it, raising some money, and a lot of cool things over there with Mike. Reason why we're doing the show, Leaders Live, right? Find out how CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs, venture capitalists operate. Once we understand how they operate, we can connect them with like-minded individuals and hopefully help them grow. We grow together, and relationships matter. That's the genesis of the show. Let's bring in Nick Jordan, CEO, founder of Narrative. Nick, welcome to Leaders Live. Thanks for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
This is going to be a good one, I know. We did a little talking before. There's a lot of good stories behind here, but before we get into what you're doing at Narrative, how you built your business. Can you give us a little bit of background, how you started, kind of this journey you went through? Because there's been, a lot of things you've kind of built up to this point. But let's give the people a little bit of context.
Yeah, totally. I actually didn't think I had entrepreneurship in my genes. It wasn't something that I was passionate about or really excited about throughout my career. And so I actually started as a computer scientist. My degree is in computer science, and I grew up always thinking I was going to be what we called at the time computer programmers. It turned out that after I graduated with my degree, I wasn't very excited about writing code, and frankly, I wasn't very good at it. And so pretty quickly, I moved into more of a product management track in my career, which was a good fit because it let me take my technical skills that I learned as a computer scientist and sort of apply them to the business side of things. And so I spent some time in Silicon Valley. I worked at Yahoo for many years. I then came back to the New York area and worked for a startup named Demdex, which was acquired by Adobe. I hung out at Adobe for a couple of years before going to another startup called TapAd. They were acquired about 5 years ago. And it was right around that time that I actually had the idea for Narrative, and I saw some problems that needed to be solved, and frankly, no one that was really solving them well. And so it was more the product manager in me that led me to entrepreneurship. I cannot see a problem go unsolved, and so as I saw it and as I realized how important that problem was, and I'll talk about what it is in a little bit. That really led me down the path of starting Narrative and becoming an entrepreneur.
Yeah, it seems like you've been a part of a lot of different teams that have worked, a lot of different life cycles of businesses, and then now you started your own Narrative in 2016, which is this data streaming marketplace where you can buy and sell information. Give us a little bit more background about Narrative. You saw that there was missing, what was that? And then, how, what is the actual business? Because I'm sure you can do a lot of justice.
Yeah. I mean, there's an overused phrase that data is the new oil. It's overused because, well, it's overused. It's just like, it's the first thing out of everyone's mouth when they start talking about data, but there's some truth to it, right? I'd say, businesses broadly, small, large, every industry are really understanding the value and how to create value from data. And so that is a trend that's been going on for a while, but I think it's really starting to accelerate with some machine learning and AI and trends around big data. Unfortunately, getting your hands on data can be just as hard as extracting oil from the ground. While there's value there, data is pretty complex, and so it's not an easy thing to go acquire if you don't already have it. And if you have data and you want to sell it, you effectively have to set up the equivalent of a network of gas stations to monetize this stuff. And so the problem that we fundamentally saw is that while there's more and more value being ascribed to data, the ability for companies and for individuals to actually buy and sell it as an asset was being greatly depressed just because it's so complicated and there's so much friction between the buy side and sell side. And so the platform that we've built, our solution was to give software to both organizations that are trying to acquire data and organizations that are trying to sell data, to remove all of that friction, to effectively take all of the things that are really painful and take a long time about that process and make them turnkey, automated, or at least normalize them by putting some really nice software and workflow around them.
So break down a little bit of some of the customers that you're working with, because it's such a broad sector, right? Data, everybody can use the data and help build their business, helps you understand what's going on. But I mean, who are the customers or clients that you're typically working with? So we have a better understanding, that they're using this data to move their business forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty broad base, which is a good thing from a total addressable market perspective. And we very intentionally went in wanting to build a generic solution, right? We didn't want to build a solution that just worked for hedge funds or just worked for real estate companies or just worked for advertising agencies, because, while data can help all three of those places, the real opportunity is much broader than that. And so, the way that we tend to think about the folks that we're working with is, first, they have to be organizations that either are currently using or have aspirations to make data a key part of their business. And so, one way that we qualify companies is if you go look at a job board for any given company, if they're hiring data engineers, if they're hiring data scientists, if they're hiring business development people who are focused on data, that's a pretty good indication that they're at a level of maturity around data that would make them a good fit for us. Beyond that, it's, we work with financial services companies, we work with direct-to-consumer brands, we work with digital publishers, we work with large technology companies. We're starting to do things with companies around agriculture technology and sort of, places that, historically have relied on sort of data sets that are, more longitudinal in nature. Like, I want to look, understand the rain patterns for the last 60 years to try to figure out when to plant my crops. Those companies are now using IoT sensors to help them make decisions, all of which are either generating data or required data. And so, I mean, it's really a broad spectrum set of customers that we're working with.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And you've obviously built out this business since 2016, starting off, with a small group. You're up to 35 employees now. Obviously, a little bit of strange times. But can you talk a little bit about the business growth and putting together, you said you've got a product manager, you understand how to build out this organization and teams. How do you look at that to really, optimize business efficiencies?
Yeah, I mean, early on, I've gotten to telling people that my least favorite part of building a company was the first 18 months of building a company, because frankly, it doesn't look or feel or act anything like a company at that point. It's like 4, people in a room. So it's more of a club than it is a company. And I actually just got off a phone call earlier today with another entrepreneur that's sort of in those very early stages. And, he had some frustration that it's not all just up to the right. And my feedback to him was, if you look if you look just logically at startups, they should not work. Like between, the lack of access to capital and the competitive, ecosystem, and the fact that it's hard to get people to do things differently, people very much are impacted by inertia. And so, giving them a better mousetrap does not always get them to use that mousetrap. And so, at least initially, we had to figure out how to create something from nothing. And I think the thing that we did that was fortuitous there is we basically de-risked it for one side of our ecosystem to work with us. So, you can think of us as working with both companies that want to sell data and companies that want to buy data. On the sell side, we basically said, what if we give you a set of tools for free that, let you sell your data efficiently, but in the process, we don't take, any control over your data strategy. We don't tell you how to price it. We don't tell you who you have to sell it to and who you can't sell it to. We're giving you the same amount of control as if you were to do this in the absence of narrative and in the absence of our tools. But we'll give you things that make your life easier. And so in many ways, it was a no risk proposition for them, right? Worst case scenario, they spent a little bit of time and didn't make any money. Best case scenario was we became a really active channel for them. And so we probably had, 2 dozen, 3 dozen suppliers using our tools before we had a single company that wanted to buy data using our tools. So, the sell side wasn't making any money, but they also, weren't losing anything along the way. And once we had critical mass on the sell side, it became much easier to go to buyers and say, hey, if you wanted to work with these 36 companies on your own, you'd have to pick up the phone 36 times and sign 36 contracts and do 36 integrations. Like you'd have to do everything 36 times. We now give you an interface where you can, do it 36 times by clicking a button. And that was what really sort of, kicked off the flywheel. Every time you push the boulder a little bit up the mountain, it becomes a little bit easier. And so at this point, it has just been every rotation becomes a little bit easier, and at some point, it starts to feel like you're pushing it downhill instead of uphill.
Right. That's obviously a beautiful place to be in, right? I mean, that's where you want to be.
Yeah.
So again, we work with Entre, a group of entrepreneurs, startup community here. So there's a lot of founders and CEOs kind of looking for tips and tricks here. And I think a lot of them, besides looking for co-founders or trying to hire their team, that was super helpful. But, when it gets to the point of raising capital, you've been through a couple rounds now. Can you give some thoughts on how you went about that process? We talked about this a little bit beforehand, but I thought it was interesting, looking at old decks that have something like that. But can you talk about that process of raising capital and going through those rounds?
Yeah. So, if I think about our seed round, in many ways that was much easier than our Series A. It actually took a little bit longer, but just from a process perspective, it was easier. And the reason it was easier is we were pre-revenue. We had no KPIs to speak of. We had no product to speak of. We literally had nothing. I went to go back to, it's like 3 people in a room. The thing that I see a lot of entrepreneurs do is they're in a big rush to get revenue because they feel like it's, once they can show revenue traction, that'll make it easier for them to raise money. And that may be true. I think the other side of that coin is once you start having KPIs to look at, the investment community is going to want to see those KPIs always improving. And at least in the early stages, that's pretty unlikely. You're going to find a little bit of traction. You're probably going to lose some customers, right? You're learning, and frankly, learning may be one of the KPIs that's hard to quantify, but the most important thing. But you're going to be judged by those KPIs, and so. I looking back on the seed round, I wish we could do that again because it was a little bit easier because we were telling a story more than we had to, show the proof points. When it came to raising the Series A, the entire thing was different. I think from a what did we learn perspective, there's a number of things. First, start planning early. Start, creating your deck a full 6 months before you're ready to raise. You're going to want to go through a lot of iterations of it. You're going to want to run it by a lot of people. It's hard. There's a lot of work to do. And so I don't think you can start preparing for it early enough. The second thing is to start to have relationships with the investment community before you're going and doing fundraising. it is hard to show up to someone's office, having never met them, having them never met you, them knowing nothing about you, and convince them to write you a check. Now, if you've had previous conversations with them, if you've been keeping them up to date with an email newsletter, it's much easier. You've already built a relationship, and now you can actually get down to the progress of the business. And then, going back to sort of the content is, I was hungry to look at every deck I could find across every stage, every company, every type of startup. And honestly, the vast majority of the content that was out there, I found, bad. I didn't like it. It was more, gave me ideas of what not to do. But there were a lot of gems as well. And so, my tactic when building a lot of the fundraising material was take the best of all of the different stuff that I can find, and sort of then, compile it into something in the narrative voice that took all of those things. And then recently, we actually just published our fundraising materials on Business Insider. Anonymized. We took out some of the logos. We, took out the numbers and just sort of show the graphs and things like that. But in order to give back to the community, I would have broken someone's leg to be able to get access to my deck before I had actually go build the thing.
Yeah, it sounds extremely helpful. We'll try to put the link to that Business Insider link in the copy of this afterwards, so people can check that out as well. Maybe Mike can find that and throw it in the comments. But the future for Narrative, you just raised a good hefty Series A. What is the future for Narrative, and what type of opportunities are you looking for that potentially someone watching right now can say, maybe I have that, or maybe I have somebody working in this industry friendly with that I should connect with Nick?
Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting. Our vision for the business really hasn't changed since we started, and so in some ways, it's just an expansion of what we're already doing. With the money, a lot of that is going to go into headcount and hiring. So hiring out sales team to go, increase growth, hiring out product and engineers to continue to improve our product, focusing on marketing, which historically we've done very little in the past. Obviously, our partner support teams, and it's building a company. And if you were to look at our P&L, it's probably 80% of our costs are salary, and that will sort of continue. I think there's then a accelerate where we're already succeeding. So take the verticals and the use cases and the features that we have that are working really well, and just double down on those. There's not really any reason to take your eye off the ball where you're doing well. And then there's the increasing the addressable market. So going into verticals we've ignored historically. Doing some R&D projects around the product that sort of bring us into new places. In some ways, our game plan for how to grow and how to succeed is somewhat boring. It's you're taking the playbook of a lot of other high growth companies. I think what's most important is that we have a really clear vision of where we are today, where the market is going to be in 12 to 24 months, and how we can position ourselves best when the market gets there. Recently, First Smart Capital put out a data ecosystem slide. They put out one every year. It's actually quite amazing. They can almost fit 1,000 logos on a slide that talk about all the companies in the data ecosystem. We were in a category called data discovery and exchanges. And there's 4 other logos in the box with us. One of them was Amazon, AWS, and the other one was Snowflake, which just IPO'd for $50+ billion. So in some ways that's great. Like those are the logos you want to be next to, because it shows the opportunity and kind of where we're playing. A little bit it's scary because Amazon has more resources than God, and Snowflake's not far behind, and so. We're competing against the big boys. What I'm excited about is I think we have a very unique way of approaching the problem that we're all going after, and it's unique in a way that we could actually partner with those guys and carve out a large portion of that box for ourselves.
Yeah, I actually saw that. You think there's a path for the IPO like Snowflake, or is that just not even in the thought process right now?
No, I mean there absolutely is. I mean data. I mean, I have numbers that say data is a multi-trillion-dollar annual business. These market sizing exercises are always a little bit all over the place, but the opportunity is huge. I don't think we're going to wake up 6 months from now and people are going to look back and be like, oh, remember when the world was all run on data? Like data is here to stay. It is a thing, and it will continue to get bigger. I think the market broadly for data continues to grow. So, I mean, absolutely the goal here is, 11-figure, enterprise value by building a platform around the data ecosystem that really creates value for all of our customers.
Absolutely. That's an exciting future ahead of you.
Right now I'd just be happy to get out of my guest room, but we'll save the billions of dollars for a year or two from now.
Yeah, come hang out with me at this penthouse suite.
I'd say that is nice. The views are amazing.
I'm like flying over in New York City right now.
Yeah.
Before we get into questions with Mike tomorrow, I just definitely want to reiterate: please submit some questions, whether it is LinkedIn or you're watching on YouTube. Definitely submit questions for Nick. Also, maybe throw your LinkedIn bio on there too, as we, this is a network community too. You guys can all talk, try to find relationships or, collaborations with each other. But within that networking aspect, how do you look at networking, Nick? Because obviously it's a little bit different now, but let's say it wasn't a COVID type period. How do you look at building your network, growing your peers, or potentially growing your business through the networking aspect of it?
Yeah, I mean, networking, it's much easier to cultivate new business and find potential new colleagues, and through networking than it is through cold calls or cold emails or just meetings that randomly get set up. I actually frankly struggle with this a little bit. I'm an introvert by nature. And there's parts of the pandemic lockdown that I've really thrived in because I haven't had to go out and in my duties as a CEO do a lot of networking and all the rest. I'm just doing it over a camera versus doing it in person. It's actually one of the things that I'm really trying to work on in my career is to get much more comfortable in doing that networking. I guess the advice that I would give myself and anyone else that's in my position is, you have to make sure that you're surrounding yourself with people that complement your strengths. And so we recently brought on a COO, Stephen Schwartz, who while he's only been here for a month and he's joined during the middle of a pandemic, is doing a great job at making sure that, we're sort of, organically going out there and doing networking. And we have a bunch of other folks on the team that are really driven around doing that. I certainly play a big part in that, but I will say one of the harder things about moving into a CEO role is the expectations around, being the figurehead and doing the networking and doing much more public speaking and things like that. And it's something that I've worked quite a bit on, but I still have a little ways to go.
One last thing I wanted to get into before we brought the Q&A portion in with Mike. You mentioned the expansion. You mentioned the hiring aspect of the future of what you're doing. So you need to hire to grow the company. But how do you look at hiring? How do you look at new talent? Like, what strategies do you have from that that maybe you've learned in the past?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because COVID has changed things quite a bit. I mean, we used to bring in, a portion of our team has always been distributed. We are very product and engineering heavy, as you might think for a technology company, and hiring engineers in New York City is neither cheap nor are they plentiful, right? You're competing with Wall Street, you're competing with Amazon, you're competing with Google and Facebook, and so. From early days, we've been hiring developers in Canada and in the US, but sort of outside of the major metropolitan areas. The good news about that is we learned a lot about hiring externally and running a company when everyone's not in the same room. But we would, as part of the interview process, fly people in and, have, meet people and go out to dinner with people and make sure that not only were they talented and could they do the job, but were they people that we actually wanted to spend time with and sit in a room with for 8 hours. I think the one thing that I've come to appreciate in my career more and more is that it's not just the skill of the person or how much experience they have or how much gravitas they bring. Like, you're going to have to spend a lot of time with these people, and life's too short to spend time with assholes. And so, a lot of our hiring philosophy has been around finding great people, but also, great people in the sense of, they're good people as well. The other part of that is trying to bring in a diverse workforce. There's all of the social reasons that you should do that, but from a purely outcome driven reason is, if you get a bunch of people in a room that all have the same ideas and thoughts and the same lived experiences, who's the person that's going to push you in a different direction or see the world through a different set of eyes? One of my favorite exercises at the company is to sit around and for everyone to take a position, even if it's not the position they believe in, to sort of, as a thought exercise to make sure that we're thinking about things from every angle. And so, also making sure that we're, pulling in a bunch of people that just don't, look and act and have the same life experiences of me, is gonna create a much better long-term outcome for us.
Yeah, I think that's extremely helpful. Let's bring in Mike, who's been monitoring the Q&A portion of it. Mike, CEO, Entre. Welcome, Mike. Welcome back. How you doing?
Hey guys, just enjoying this. We've been having some questions come in, and Nick, really appreciate you sharing all of this. I think it's been extremely helpful. The first thing kind of relates to when you brought up monetizing, and I'd like it'd be really interesting, when should you start? Because you mentioned that it was nice when you were early on that you didn't really have to focus on monetizing. But as you grew, obviously, and raise more money, investors are going to want to see revenue and those numbers come in. And obviously every business is different, but I'm curious if you have any deeper thoughts on that, on when people should start to monetize or think about it in the process as they're going through and the early stages of their company.
Yeah, I would say that when they really feel like the monetization is repeatable, I feel like if you hustle enough and if you have a decent enough salesperson or sales team, you can close deals, right? Especially if the price point is something that's not, crazy, you can get someone to plop down $5,000 or $10,000 or $500 or whatever it is. But, if you're doing that and what you find is they use the product for a month and then they go away because it's not providing the $500 in value, then you have a problem. I think a lot of folks in their rush to show revenue growth, they say, well, I'd rather have $500 and have them go away than not have the $500. I would say, don't have the $500. Give your first 20 customers access to the platform for free. Treat it as a beta product or an alpha product. Sit down with them on a monthly basis and get feedback about where they're getting value, where they're not getting value. Have that feedback then go back into subsequent versions. And when you really, when you start having those interviews and you hear things like, I couldn't live without this, or this is my favorite product to use on a daily basis, or I've told 3 of my colleagues about what you're doing, that tends to be the point where you should say, okay, we have something here, and we're confident that if we go sell it to 20 new companies and they're paying for it, that they're not going to go away. I think until you've shown a little bit of that repeatability, the revenue, unless someone walks in and says, hey, I'll give you $1 million, and you're like, shit, I'm going to take the $1 million. It's like raising around. I mean, it's the revenue in those early days is not going to make you or break you, but it may create a lot more friction when you get to the fundraising process.
Gotcha. That makes a ton of sense, and that's super helpful, I think, for a lot of people. And having it, I think the repeatability of it is so key there that you brought up. So thank you for that. The other question we have here is kind of relating more to mentorship and how surrounding yourself with kind of mentors throughout the early stages or when you're starting out Was there anyone in your life that really helped you get started in all of this stuff, entrepreneurship and kind of like learning the way? And if so, what were some of like the major teachings that you learned from them, or any like big, key elements that like set you up later on for success, or maybe helped you even avoid some mistakes? I think that's a huge part of the benefits of mentorship. So I'm curious if you've had any of that along your way.
Yeah, I mean, definitely have. I've had a great support network. Everyone from my wife, who in the early days before it really looked anything like a company, was a sounding board and could really help me walk through, does this make sense to anyone but me? We had a very early investor who actually became a board member that, I still talk to on a weekly basis. And, he's really great at sort of giving me the bigger picture, like helping me think about how investors think about their investments and about how potential acquirers, go about their process. And so, kind of giving me the eyes and ears of folks that, whose shoes I haven't walked in. I'm also friends with a bunch of folks that have become entrepreneurs over their careers and are at different stages, some that succeeded, some that didn't succeed. They've been, really great to talk to. They often give me, very contradictory advice. And so what I usually tell people is, lean on anyone that you can, but I feel like as an entrepreneur, you need to be fairly strong-willed in some of your opinions. It's not that you shouldn't solicit advice. It's not that you shouldn't take advice that when you get it, but advice is cheap and every situation is different. And there's not a magic bullet for this stuff. If there was, we would all just go read that book and all become massively successful. But the fact of the matter is that's not how it works. And so, the way I usually take and solicit advice and mentorship is to talk to everyone, distill everything they've been, they told me, and include sort of my lived experiences, and then go make a decision on it. I really, it's fairly rare for me for someone to just say, you should go do X, Y, and Z, and then blindly I just go do X, Y, and Z. It happens, and it tends to happen in places that I don't have as much experience, or I don't have as much, I'm not as highly as opinionated. So, the best way to structure, line of credit from a bank, or, things like that, I'm without a finance background, there's not much I can add to that. But for a lot of sort of the core, how we run the business, it's solicit as much advice as possible and then come up with your own decision.
That's awesome. And I think that pretty much wraps up. I want to be cautious of your time too, because I know we're coming up here. So thank you so much, Nick, for all of this and for coming on and sharing your story and all of this. It's super helpful. And I'll toss that back over to Charlie now. Thanks,
Mike. Appreciate it. A lot of gems here that we're getting out of this. As we wrap up, Nick, just kind of give us your words to live by, personal mantra or ethos, that kind of gets you going through the day.
Oh man, I don't know if I have one of those.
Deep stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll give you a little insight to my personality. This is probably the best. I don't know if it was any advice I ever got, but the best thing I realized in my career is if I wasn't uncomfortable, I probably wasn't learning. I probably wasn't growing. And so there have been times in my career where I look around and I'm just like, this is easy. Like I could do this, with a hand tied behind my back. And those are the times that I tend to go look for something else. For folks that are looking to grow in their career and grow their company, you should be pushing yourself. You should always be uncomfortable. Even if you clear that bar, the bar can then be lifted higher, and now you have to clear that. That can obviously be exhausting, and it's not for everyone. But I'm constantly evaluating. Am I just doing what I'm good at, and am I just doing what I find easy, or am I actually pushing myself to learn and become better and do more? And when it's the latter, I actually tend to be a lot happier. There's bad days for sure, but it's to keep climbing the mountain.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely feeling comfortable to keep yourself growing and be, evolving.
Yeah, totally.
That's solid stuff. That's it. That's all we got today, Nick. I really appreciate your time. If anyone's watching this in the replay and you made it this far, definitely be sure to tag Nick and ask him further questions if we haven't hit it. And maybe tag your favorite part, as Mike and his team at Entre will clip out some of the best parts. I think that the clip about hiring and looking for the best types of people to work with is a good one too. But Nick, thank you very much. Have a great week, and we will touch base soon.
Thank you.